button. We are recording. All right. We're going to be starting on page 12. Página 12. And before we jump in, this last section of the chapter, we're actually getting into the meat of some stuff here. He was talking about steps and stages. So he was kind of delving into how many teachers, philosophers, scholars have tried to show the steps and the stages to human spiritual development and psychological growth. And there's been lots of different schemas, lots of different ways of looking at the milestones along the way, the shape of the journey, so on and so forth. So for the last 4 or 5 pages, that's what we've been dealing with, taking a look at those steps and stages. And now we're going to move into the next section, which is of God and religion. So he's going to kind of apply these steps and stages and the concept of stages of spiritual development now to religion. And we're going to take a look at that. He's going to be a little bit critical here of religion and the way that it's dealt with steps and stages, or more importantly, hasn't dealt with steps and stages. So we're gonna dive into that. But before we do, anybody have anything that they wanted to? Oh, hello, Carol. Carol's there, and yeah. Anyone have anything they wanted to bring up from last week? Was there any unfinished business or something that we left hanging, or something you've been thinking about this week? All righty. Hi, Lindy.
Hello.
There she is. Okay. All right, nothing? Clean slate. Let's go. Let's get started. So page 12, right at the bottom there, of God and religion, theologically and objectively speaking, we are already in union with God. We are already in union with God. But it is very hard for people to believe or experience this when they have no positive sense of identity, little courage yet, no strong boundaries to contain mystery, and little inner religious experience at any depth. Thus, the first journey is always about externals, formulas, superficial emotions, flags and badges, correct rituals, Bible quotes, and special clothing, all of which largely substitute for actual spirituality. Yet they are all used and needed to create the container. Yes, it is largely style and sentiment instead of real substance, but even that is probably necessary. Just don't give your life for mere style and sentiment. Pope John the 23rd's motto might be heard here: in essentials, unity; in non-essentials, liberty; and in all things, charity. That is second half of life, hard-won wisdom. Have any of you heard that quote before? In essential things, unity; in non-essentials, liberty; and in all things, charity. I first heard that ascribed to Augustine, 4th, 5th century, Augustine of Hippo. But in reading more about it, nobody knows where it came from. It kind of surfaced in the English language in the 17th century, and it was included in an encyclical by John the 23rd, but nobody really knows who said it. But I want you to think about that for just a second. In essentials, unity; in non-essentials, liberty; and in all things, charity. It sounds really good. Does it bother you at any level? Does anything about that quote bother you?
I don't quite think I don't quite understand.
I don't either.
In non-essentials, liberty.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I don't understand what it means either. In like essential things of life, we are all united. There's unity in what we believe.
No, he's really talking doctrinally here more, but I mean, it could apply to a lot of things besides theological doctrine. But in the essentials, and in terms of our beliefs, in the essentials, we should be in unity. But in non-essentials, everybody should be given liberty to be able to believe what they want to believe. And in all things, we should be practicing love toward each other. So that's the idea of it. Is there any fly in the ointment in that saying, though, as you read it?
Well, for some people, some things are more essential than others,
Exactly.
right?
Yes. Who
So we're
gets
not
to
united.
decide what's essential and what's not
Right,
essential? I
exactly.
mean, that was the first thing when I heard this. I thought that sounds really good, you know. But then on closer inspection, man, that's what we can't agree on. What is essential and what's not? That's the whole point. You know, if we could agree on what's essential and what's non-essential, well, it would be a cakewalk. But who gets to decide? That's the issue there.
I don't think it's a collective decide. I think it's an individual understanding.
Mhm.
When I read it, in essentials, unity. Well, so then what would be essential to me? My family, things of that nature. And this second half of life, that's become more true than ever. So, and then in non-essentials, liberty. And what I think of is what would be non-essentials? Well, things that would be outside that realm of what's essential. And then that would be kindness, you know, be liberal with grace. And in all things, charity, love. Well, all of them are ideals of which to live up to, should one choose to. But that's my interpretation.
Mhm.
Recording in progress.
So really what this is trying to establish is a way of going forward in community, as a collective, in a group, as a church. You know, how do we handle the divisions that are created? Did someone just come on that's got a speaker on or something? Because I'm starting to get.
Yes.
Frank,
Yeah, I'm trying to get rid of it right now.
Okay,
Just
I'm
at
gonna
home.
mute you for a while, Frank.
Frank,
You
Yeah,
come
go
back.
ahead.
Frank.
Trying Hey, to-
Frank, you're up there twice.
Frank.
Yeah, double Frank.
Oh, no wonder. That's why. If he's
Yeah.
there twice. Okay.
Ah, what's wrong? That's
Oh,
why we're Frank.
Well, Frank, we should be okay now. I muted the other one, so you
Okay.
can forget about
We
it.
can only take one of you, Frank.
Here,
The
here's
way
the
I've heard
thing.
used,
Here's the
the
thing.
way
If-
I've heard
if-
it,
hang on. Here's the thing. If
Sorry.
we're trying to find a way to move forward amidst all the division and all the squabbling that goes on, this was a formula for trying to do that. But it is sidestepping and missing the main issue, is that nobody can agree on the essentials. That's the problem. It's always been the problem, and it'll always be the problem. And I think Julie is right in the sense that what it comes down to is that just use love as the overarching, you know, covering for all the differences between us intellectually. But in the final analysis, we're going to have to decide for ourselves what is essential and what is not. And so it really doesn't work in terms of helping the divisions that are going to creep up in any group over the differences of opinion. But the first line of this paragraph, I think, is really the one to kind of take away. Theologically and objectively speaking, we are already in union with God. I don't know, you probably heard my little rant about Michelangelo's horse. You know, the fact that when Michelangelo was commissioned for a sculpture, he would get the block of marble or limestone or whatever he was going to carve shipped to him, and he would just walk around it and imagine the finished sculpture standing in the block of stone as if frozen in a block of ice. And when he had imagined it and could see it down to every last vein and muscle, then all he had to do was remove everything that wasn't the horse, that wasn't the statue, or whatever it happened to be. So he saw it in terms of removing the negative space. In a very real way, you know, this perfect kingdom person that each one of us were born as and to be is already standing inside of us as if frozen in a block of ice. And so that's why Meister Eckhart can say that the spiritual progress or spiritual journey is much more about subtraction than addition. It's really about stripping away everything that has accrued over the perfect unity with God that we were born with. And so I think that's a real important distinction for us to make. We as Christians have been so steeped in original sin that we're born depraved, that we're born separate from God because of Adam's sin, and nothing that we can do can bridge that gap. Only the perfect sacrifice of Jesus on the cross can cover over that gap. But that's the exact opposite of what the Jews believed who actually wrote our scriptures. And it's the opposite of what the mystics and the contemplatives learn about themselves as they become more and more able to move into this place of pure presence. And so at least consider this, that we've got it backwards, that we're not talking about pulling in something from outside to complete us, but we're just trying to strip away that which is covering over the union that is already there. And so that's a real important, I think, for us to flag. But as he says, it's very hard for people to believe or experience that this union is already there, that it's already deep within us, when we have no positive sense of identity, little courage, no strong boundaries to contain ministry, and little inner religious experience at any depth. And here's where the church has fallen down, especially more recently. They're not giving us any pointers to that inner religious experience. They're not pointing us toward depth. They're keeping us on the surface. They're continuing to be a first half of life experience in terms of continuing to build the container and not helping us to experience the content. And this is what we're trying to, to work against, to end run around, and our culture and our churches are working against us at this point. But this is where we're trying to get. Second half of life. Yeah, William.
Dave, I was thinking that in essentials unity, trying to figure out what the essentials are and differing around the essentials, that's a first half of life response. And I think he said the next sentence there is this second half of life, hard-won wisdom. Like when we move into the second half of life, what is essential changes. And I forgot who said love is that's the essential. Like that becomes the overarching foundation there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what they're essentially talking about are the essentials from a theological or doctrinal point of view. I'm sure you've heard of the 8 essentials of Christianity, have to do with the virgin birth and the bodily resurrection and the vicarious atonement and so on and so forth. So those are the theological essentials. And in the first centuries of Christianity, those were all in flux and they were all being fought over. And it was the church councils starting in the 4th century that finally set in stone what Christianity believes, from an orthodox doctrinal point of view. And so those are the kind of theological essentials that they're talking about, but everybody has been fighting about them since the beginning and there's no end in sight. So this was an attempt to try to tamp those things down and to paper over or find a way to bridge those divisions, but it misses from my point of view, it misses the essential problem. I remember the first class that I took in biblical interpretation in the master's program, and the teacher says, we just have to find, he said, all we have to do is read the Bible aright, and then we can all, impose doctrinal unity on the church. And it's like, if that hasn't been done in 2,000 years, how in the world are we going to do it now? It was just kind of silly on its face as far as I was concerned. But this need to want to impose some kind of unity on the church has always been there. But it's a contradiction in terms.
Okay, I have a thought. And this thought has to do with the with Doug and Becky in many ways. I think about Becky saying sometimes a cigar is just a cigar. But the thought of Doug is, Doug took a golf lesson once from a guy who was a proponent of the 9-step swing. and what he was teaching was that if you're in your golf swing, if you get your swing and your golf club in each of these 9 steps, then you have a good golf swing. And it messed him up horribly because he's trying to think about getting to every step. Then he went to another teacher who said to him, Doug, there's a golf swing in you. Just find it. And I think of that in terms of the essentials. You know, there's an essential in you. It's like the marble statue of a horse inside the stone. It's in there, but it's a process of finding it, which isn't just subtraction, but it's also discovery of who it is that you are and what kind of instrument you are. I mean, we're all some kind of instrument. God has some design built into each of us during the course of life, discovering that, understanding that. Anyway.
I love
just a
that.
thought.
I love that. Yeah.
But I wonder if both teachers weren't helpful. Was one of them completely not helpful, or were both of them helpful? And was the second one dependent on the first one?
I don't know.
Obviously, it wasn't helpful for Doug. He was all tied in knots.
Poor guy, he was so messed up for about a month.
You know what that reminds me of, Brady?
But
If
maybe
you
then
could-
it sank in and it became internalized and it did help. Who knows? We don't know that.
uh,
Maybe both teachers helped. Or maybe only one helped. I don't know. I'm curious though.
This reminds me of, have you guys seen?
Maybe the
movie-
one helps by not helping.
Have you guys seen the movie Tin Cup?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you got to see the movie Tin Cup with Kevin
No.
Costner. Anyway, he gets so tied up in knots with his golf swing that he can't even think straight, you know. And then his caddy tells him, "Okay, I want you to take your cap and turn it around backwards." What? He says, "I want to take all the change in your left pocket and put it in your right pocket. And I want you to stand on one foot." I mean, he has him do all this crazy stuff. And he says, "Now hit the ball." And he hits it and it's perfect. He says, "What did you just do?" He says, "Well, you're not thinking anymore, are you? You know, you're thinking about how stupid you look, but you're not thinking about your golf swing anymore. You're thinking too much." And he says, "Well, I've never been accused of that." But anyway, same idea here. I mean, we can think ourselves into all sorts of knots and fits and right into paralysis. And especially thinking about all of these essentials and all of this complicated stuff. And what it really comes down to is very simple. You know, it really does come down to charity. It comes down to caritas, it comes down to love. And if we can just let ourselves get there, then we can then fall into whatever we think the essentials are. But it's all back to front. The essentials aren't going to lead us to love, but love can lead us to the essentials. Can you all still hear me? Am I still moving? Okay, good.
Yeah.
I got an unstable message on my screen, so I will make sure I'm still broadcasting here. Let's continue. In the first half of our lives, we have no container for such awesome content, no wine skins that are prepared to hold such utterly intoxicating wine. You see, authentic God experience always burns you, yet does not destroy you, just as the burning bush did to Moses. But most of us are not prepared for such burning, nor even told to expect it. The Islamic mystics seem to be the most honest here, as we see in the ecstatic and erotic poetry of Rumi, Kabir, Hafiz. By definition, authentic God experience is always too much. It consoles our true self only after it has devastated our false self.
Man.
We must begin to be honest about this instead of dishing out fast food religion. Early stage religion is largely preparing you for the immense gift of this burning, this inner experience of God, as though creating a proper stable into which Christ can be born. Unfortunately, most people get so preoccupied with their stable and whether their stable is better than your stable, or whether their stable is the only one holy Catholic and apostolic stable, that they never get to the birth of God in the soul. There is no indication in the text that Jesus demanded an ideal stable conditions. In fact, you could say that the specific mentioning of his birth in a manger is making the exact opposite point. Animals at least had room for him, while there was no room for him in the inn where the humans dwelled.
That's really
Any reactions there?
Amen.
Beautiful.
Yeah, Yeah.
So good.
Beautiful.
great couple of paragraphs. Have you ever thought of the story of the burning bush? We've been talking about myth. Sandy brought that up. Lindy brought that up too. The idea of myth and metaphor in the Bible, and where do you draw the line? Where do you draw the line between the two? How do you know how to categorize a story in the Bible either as myth or metaphor or literal truth? Well, here's an example where it can be both. It doesn't have to be either or. But the story of Moses noticing the bush burning in the wilderness, but it's not being consumed. And so the way Rohr is interpreting that is that every experience of God burns you, but it doesn't destroy you. It doesn't consume you. And so he's looking at the story of the bush as being metaphor of this experience of God and not necessarily a literal occurrence. Now, it could be both at the same time. But I think it's so important for us to be able to see past the literal and see how the metaphor and the imagery is also evocative. It's moving us toward what he said religion is supposed to do is channel us toward this experience that burns you, this authentic experience that burns you. And what's it doing when it burns you? It burns away the dross. It burns away the stuff that is not the authentic you, but it can never burn the authentic you. It leaves that intact. In fact, it exposes that for you. And that's the whole point, So being able to see those deeper truths in the biblical stories is important. That doesn't mean it invalidates the stories themselves, literally, but we need to be able to layer on at the very least these deeper meanings if we're really going to take out what was put in. He says, by definition, authentic God experience is always too
I
much.
just had a little trouble with his,
Okay, go
what's
ahead.
that?
Go ahead, Judy.
Sorry. The line that he says, it consoles our true self only after it has devastated our false self. I guess I question the language there because I think he was making a point that it doesn't get killed off because it had its purpose in the first half of our life that was necessary at some level for our survival and our learning and our growth. But I get the point that nobody comes through life unscathed, and the burning away, I think, is I definitely agree with him that that's necessary. But at the same time, I think when you start to get a glimpse of your true self through God, through your connection to God, he helps you embrace the false self and what it provided for you as an entry level, but not try to kill it off. I guess I was struggling with his word devastated our false self. Yeah, it's painful to have that revealed and have some of the core beliefs you've embraced all your life to be to question, to be brought into the light, and to show how that you need to let them go if you're going to be growing into this new true self that you are just discovering. That's my piece.
Mhm.
I like that. I think I resonate with what you're saying, but I get his point. But we have to be compassionate to the false self. We have to be compassionate with the ego.
Right.
Because we got to live with this guy. So yeah, I like what you just said.
I get it, Judy, but I'll tell you what, it sure feels devastating when you're going through it.
Oh, you got that right.
And so I think his words are spot on for the experience of it. But that doesn't mean that the false self goes away or that it is no longer needed, because it's needed for as long as we're breathing here. And that's your
Right.
point, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But what we want to do is to integrate it. Remember, the later stages, the higher stages of development include the lower stages. It's only the
Yes.
lower stages that can't include the higher stages. And so as we move into the
Right.
second half of life and the first half, or the false self, the egoic self is devastated, or feels like it is now included, but in a balanced way. But it
Yes.
feels devastating. And that's the
does.
scary part. If we're not willing to be devastated, to go through that process of feeling that devastation, the loss of the illusion of everything we thought we were, then, as Jesus said, God loves you, but you can't go where I'm going.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yes.
Yeah, I've gone through several of those experiences, and it is devastating. But I think what comes from it is a couple things. One is understanding that the false self is ego constructed,
Mhm.
and to develop an enhanced understanding that you are not the ego,
That's right.
that that's your mechanism, that's your tool. Life,
Mhm.
just to navigate the
Mhm.
material aspects of life. But I think the other thing that comes from the devastation is wisdom to understand that part of what's burned away are the attachments.
Yep.
That there were attachments to things that were not real, that
Right.
had no substance.
Mhm.
And that meaning lies in things, different involvements,
Right.
different essentials that are exercised in the second half of life.
Yeah. Mhm.
I've
I
worked
agree.
with a bunch of wealthy men. They are just the most miserable, unhappy SOBs you cannot imagine.
Oh, wow. Mhm.
Because at 60 and 70 and 80, they're locked into all the accoutrements of the first half of life.
Yeah. Becomes a prison. Yeah.
It is. And implicitly, they don't know it. They haven't
Yeah.
woken up to it yet, but implicitly, they understand how incredibly vulnerable and fragile it is. It's all going to go
Yeah.
at some point.
You bet.
But anyway,
Yeah.
so
It also reminds me, Dave, of the Jesus as the disruptor and the reconciler.
Mhm.
Mhm. Yeah, if you think about Jesus' teaching style, I mean, he is just ruthlessly trying to devastate your egoic delusions. I mean, he is just going for the jugular. And he does it through paradox. He does it through metaphor. He does it through all of these poetic devices, everything that he can muster and bring to bear. But it's always hitting you right between the eyes and taking you out of your logical, rational stance, which is, that's the bread and butter of the ego, right? Is this logic, rational, way from point A to point B. And he's always just stepping right in the middle of that, breaking that circuit and trying to befuddle us to the point that we've got to consider a different way.
Right.
And that's the whole point of it. So he's absolutely the disruptor
Mhm.
and the consoler, right?
Yeah, both.
Dave, I have a question.
Yeah. Good to see you, man, by the way.
Hi, Alex.
yeah, hey,
In concern for my own self in terms of is this my true self or my false self? Is there ever a scenario where one is ego free?
Mhm.
Is there a scenario, you mean just in our daily life where we're ego-free?
Or let's say a period of is there ever a point where the ego dissipates and then returns later in your life, or is there always an ego that has to be tamed essentially?
I would say that there is an ego that has to be maintained. As long as we're breathing here, the ego is, think about I think of the ego, if this helps, as our interface with the rest of the world and with everyone and everything else. That's how we interface. That sense of self that can speak and think and and rationalize. That is what we use to interface and to do the things we need to do in life. What we're trying to do in contemplation, what we're trying to do in the second half of life, is get in touch with the deeper self. Is there an egoless state? Well, yeah, there is, but it's not necessarily productive or practical. You know, when we get into that state, we're in a state of free flow, and you know, we can't remain there if we're going to actually do something in life and even have relationships in life. But what we can do is have enough awareness of that deeper self that continues to be a ballast and to balance out the egoic experience. And that is what we're trying to achieve. It's not, again, either or, it's always a both and. But in our meditation or moments like that, we can, I think, get into a flow where we step aside from that. Brady, I'm sorry.
No, just one more thing, then I'll shut up.
No, go ahead.
But I've just had such strong feelings about this. I have a friend who clearly went through this, and Beth and I saw him, knew him in that first half of life, and we both knew him when he was absolutely being destroyed, and then we knew him in his second half of life. And during that course of time, he gave me this little statue. It's in my office. It's a little guy in a raincoat holding this great big heart. And you remember, this guy was a very wealthy man, very successful, but really had a life change with very difficult times. And the sculpture comes to me from him, and around the bottom it says, "I who have nothing give you my heart, so you may live in a world with hope."
Oh, wow.
That's charity.
Mhm.
It's like all the wealth, put all the wealth aside, all the success aside, all the fame, put it all aside. I have nothing but charity. I just love it.
Mhm.
That's beautiful.
That
is
nice.
Wow.
Was he a friend, Brady? Was he a client or both?
He's a friend.
A friend.
Friend, yeah.
I mean, it is just, there's nothing better than to see someone turn a corner like that, if I'm understanding you correctly here. You know,
Yep.
to turn that corner and actually embrace the second half of life and be able to see with that kind of wisdom, that's always a beautiful thing.
Yeah. You're kidding.
So that last paragraph we read, that early stage religion is preparing you for the immense gift of this burning, this inner experience of God. And I wish I could say the church has done a better job of that. Usually it is the outliers that are doing this job. You know, it's going to be Francis of Assisi, those type of people that stand outside the church and often are at odds with the institution of the church, who are really the ones that are the standard bearers, the ones that are pointing to the trailhead of the way, right? They're going to be on the outside, that voice crying in the wilderness that Jesus talked about in terms of John the Baptist. That's the kind of characters that are usually the ones who are really evoking this type of journey, because once something has become institutionalized, well, now it has something to protect. It has a status quo to protect. And as soon as you get into that, then you've really sort of lost the way. And so the church, it's difficult for the church to do that and be a functioning institution at the same time. So we just have to realize that that is one of the limitations, I think, of an institutional church. But that doesn't mean that within the walls of that institution and in the midst of that community, that we can't also take these journeys ourselves. But that's going to be our responsibility to take that journey, and not rely on the church to do it for us, to move into that passive position where we're expecting others or the institution to take the journey for us or to ensure our quote unquote salvation. We've lost our way before we begin. And so it's really important for us to realize that it's still up to us, even if we are within a denomination, a church, or a faith. And so not to lose that. It would be nice if we had more support from our institutions. But like I said, that's always been difficult. It usually lasts for a little Camelot golden period, and then it gets lost again, you know. But each generation can relight the fire if they wish. But that this is kind of what we're up against. We got to be salmon to a certain degree. I like to say salmon and anchovies. You know, you got to be salmon willing to swim up the stream, and you got to be an anchovy willing to have a strong enough taste that a lot of people aren't going to like you. You know, it's just kind of the way it works. You know, salmon and anchovies. And this line here, unfortunately, most people get so preoccupied with the stable, with the container, and whether it's better or the only one, that they never get to actually letting God be birthed in their stable, birthed into their manger. And that was a really nice metaphor, I think, that he used there. But going on, as a priest of 40 years, I find that much of the spiritual and pastoral work of churches is often ineffective at the levels of real transformation and calls forth immense passivity and even many passive-aggressive responses. So we're right on the beam there. As a preacher, I find that I am forced to dumb down the material in order to interest a Sunday crowd that does not expect or even want any real challenge, nor does it exhibit much spiritual or intellectual curiosity. Just repeat what I expect to hear, Father, and maybe a joke or two. As a spiritual director, I find that most people facing the important transformative issues of social injustice, divorce, failure, gender identity, and inner life of prayer, or any radical reading of the gospel are usually bored and limited by the typical Sunday church agenda. And these are good people, but they keep on doing their own kind of survival dance because no one has told them about their sacred dance. Of course, clergy cannot talk about a further journey if they've not gone on it themselves. And this reminds me of Francis of Assisi's famous line, to preach the gospel continuously, but use words where necessary. You know, we've got to be living this thing. And if we're not, then we have no authority and no way to even begin to try to express these truths that really can't be expressed, but, you know, we have to be experiencing it ourselves.
Hey, Dave, do you dumb it down for us?
Can I say what now?
I said, do you dumb it down for us?
Well, you know, you guys will never know how many punches I pull on a Sunday morning. You know, I mean, I don't really believe that I dumb it down. In fact, most of the people that I've talked to, if anything, they're telling me that it's too much for a 40 or 45 minute, you know, space of time on a Sunday morning, or that I put too much into it. It's too densely packed. These are the comments that I normally get. But I'll tell you what I do. I try to know my audience. What we can talk about here among the 19 of us is very different than what I can talk about on a Sunday morning, where, you know, I've maybe got 30, 40, 50 people in the room, all at vastly different stages and levels, and maybe some newcomers, and then people, you know, streaming in that I don't even have a clue. And so I narrow my focus on Sunday mornings. So that's my narrowest focus on Sunday morning, because it has to try to hit within the playing field of most of the people that I'm speaking with. And then when we get into small groups, well, then there's a wider spectrum that can be included. And when I get down to individual people, if I'm just meeting with them individually, well, then depending on the person, you know, we can have a straight across conversation or whatever. So my goal is not to dumb anything down, but it is to keep conversations going with people that if we go too far too fast, we're just going to lose them. They're just going to run screaming from the room. And the idea is, can we keep a conversation going long enough that we can start to find that common ground and maybe open some doors and windows that help them and give them permission to think in different lines. But yeah, to answer your question, Tony, I don't see it as dumbing down, but
I don't either.
yeah.
I think that you teach us how to take people where they are and make that your the way in which you engage with them to see their best side, their best person, and you bring that forward in you. And I think you have an art to be able to juggle that both inside the church setting as well as with people like ourselves as well. You know, because we're hungry, right? We're here because we're hungry.
Mhm.
And so
Absolutely.
if you don't push us and make us feel uncomfortable, we get bored, I think.
Probably good.
I'm sure you've heard the old saying that a sermon should bring comfort to the uncomfortable and discomfort to those who are comfortable. You know, the question is, again, where is that line? You know, to rock someone's boat just enough, you know, that they're intrigued and not so much that they're picking up rocks. I mean, that's always a difficult line to know.
Right on.
Yeah. And you can't hit it all the time.
Dave, when you were talking about, you know, the people who are outside of the box kind of people, I returned to Christianity through studying the Course in Miracles. And I remember I was working at one of the state hospitals, and there were a group of people that everybody knew they were weird. Like, these were weird people. Like, they were just odd, you know. And when my friend Mim invited me to the book study, the first thing that struck me is that there are like 4 or 5 people in the room here who I have always thought were really weird people. And and I was amazed, like right from the first paragraph we read and discussed, that these were my people. And the Course in Miracles is what brought me back to Christianity. It was the first palatable version of Christianity I had experienced in years, you know, and it was the weird people that were at the front lines there.
So you finally found out how weird you are. That's great. That's great, man. It's funny how we see people from the outside in and we think they're weird or they're strange or this and that. And then you get on the inside and you realize, you know, there's not that much difference. And it's just great when we give people a chance, you know, give them the benefit of the doubt, spend some time with them, let the defenses down, everything that we've been talking about in here changes everything. So finally, in short, we have not found a way to do the age-appropriate tasks of the 2 halves of life, and both groups are losing out. The juniors are made to think that the container is all there is and all they should expect, or worse, that they are mature and home free because they believe a few right things or perform some right rituals. The would-be maturing believer is not challenged to any adult faith or service to the world, much less mystical union. Everyone ends up in a muddled middle where the best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. Wow. That's William Butler Yeats. That is an amazing line. But in your experience, doesn't it sort of describe it? The best lack all conviction and the worst are full of passion and intensity. Whoa. I am convinced that much of this pastoral and practical confusion has emerged because we have not clarified the real differences, the needs, and the somewhat conflicting challenges of the 2 halves of our own lives. So let's try. Any other thoughts on that last paragraph? So from here he's going to really start to get into the meat. So now the hero and the heroine's journey. And this is something that if you've spent any time at the effect, that you've probably heard a lot about. We've gone over this territory before. I've written about it in my books, and you may have seen some of it there. But he's going to use the hero's journey now as a further roadmap for us to see how the 2 halves of life fit together and the process of the transition between the two. because basically that's what the hero's journey is. It is the process of the transition between first and second half of life perception, and the difficulty of getting there. You know, how painful it is to make that transition. How devastating it is, Judy,
Yes.
to make that transition. You know, because it always includes a wounding. There has to be a wounding.
Yeah.
You know, it is the wounding that actually is taking us from one half to the other. Without the wounding, we don't make the progress. Why would we? If everything feels good, we're just going to stay at that spot. You know, why would we want to move from that spot if there wasn't some kind of discomfort, something calling us and motivating us on?
Oh, believe me, I'm not arguing with that.
I get it. I totally get it.
Feels devastating.
But your point was well taken too. It's not an either or thing. You know, we need to, we got to hang on to that's why I don't really like the false self, because that implies there's something wrong with it, or that it needs to be outgrown. You know, the egoic self, or the conscious self, I don't know, small self even, we can call it, that I think is better, because you know, we can start to realize we still need it. It's still essential. It just needs to be balanced. So,
kind of going back to Alexander's question, it's like, if we get to this place in contemplative practice where we experience this awareness and this deep presence and so on, we have to experience that through the ego. You know, so the ego is there, even if it's not driving the bus, it's always there.
But it's kind of like what we were talking about yesterday too, William, where you had talked about trying to think non-dually. And I said, yeah, but it's that when you start as long as you're thinking, you're dual, you know, because that's what thought does. Thought is what is going to separate one from the other and create a dualism. When we're non-dual, it's when we've stepped aside from all of that thought. But we can bring non-dual awareness to the duality of our thought. You know, you can be aware of something without thinking about it. It's kind of along those lines. And so once again, we're trying to balance these things, but it's tricky, because as soon as we're thinking about it, we've stepped away from it. As soon as we attach a word to it or a name to it, we've stepped away from it. It's only in the pure experience. That's why I love, you know, Brady's death experience. When I read his manuscript, I was reading a completely non-dual experience. Now, he was expressing it in dualistic language, because what's he going to do? I mean, there's no other way to express it, but he was doing his best. I love the phrase that he used, I was made to know that. You know, it's not that he heard it or heard a voice or was told it, he was made to know that. And I thought, you know, that's the best way that you could probably describe a knowing without it being a conscious thought process. And I may be putting words in your mouth, Brady, so if I am, you know, correct me, but that's the way I took it. And I love the way that, since there was no iconography in his experience at all, it was just blackness, and he was made to know things that was not verbal. You know, I was thinking, here is someone really struggling with language to try to describe, you know, what can't be described in language, because it was a pure non-dual experience. And so our deepest self is non-dual, and it can only be experienced in real time. And as soon as you think about it, you've stepped away and you've taken a snapshot of it, and it's changed. You know? And so that's our struggle. You know, as we're talking about this stuff, we've already stepped away from it. But that's why metaphor and myth undercut that, and they take us to another place. And if we're gonna judge that as not being true anymore, or not being accurate anymore, therefore it can't be biblical anymore, then we're missing the whole point of what sacred scripture is trying to do. And what the Bible is trying to do is trying to point us to a non-dual experience in the best way that language can. See, the dog agrees with me. I think that's a dog. I don't know what that is.
I don't know. Is it a guinea pig?
It's a guinea pig.
Big one.
Yeah.
Big one.
For those of you who don't know, Brennan got a guinea pig last night, and he's not really sure he wants it anymore.
Oh.
I know. Well, it came in this huge cage that takes up, like, you know, the quarter of his room, and that wasn't expected. But I asked him last night if it made any noises during the night, and he said, yeah. I says, well, what? And he says, it squeaks. Yeah. Who knew? Who knew? Anyway, we digress. Anything we don't want to get started in the next section. So if we need to quit a little early, we actually can tonight. But any thoughts or comments?
Yeah, I want to comment about
Sure.
William Butler Yeats. You're right. The best lack all conviction, while the worst is full of passion and intensity. So I'm saying to the best of us maturing believers, the ones who don't have or we lack conviction, we are still open to dialogue. We're still open to ideas and challenges. However, the ones that are already, with conviction or passion intensity, I think it's like, I don't know, I equated with being closed already. I know what I know and I'm certain.
Okay, yes. And I think you used the magic word there, certainty. Because the more we go down this path, the less certain we become. And the more comfortable we are with being uncertain. But as soon as you do that, as soon as you get into a place where certainty is no longer your goal, conviction can be, but not certainty, then it kind of moves you into a different space. It's the people who are certain who are going to have this passionate, authoritarian kind of bent to them. And you see it, just watch televangelists or watch anybody, and it can be political, it can be religious, it can be anything really. But it's those who are certain of their position, that they're right and everyone else is wrong. Those are the ones that have that passionate intensity. And those who are moving more into liminal space, they appear less so, even though they can be just as passionate, but it's not necessarily going to come off that way. And when you are in stage 3, when you've moved out of stage 2, the groupthink, and into stage 3, which is this time of questioning, well, then you really can start to lose that sense of conviction for a time until you pass through into stage 4. But it's sort of baked into the cake of the way that this progresses in terms of our spiritual progression.
Well, it reminds me of my conversation with our Bible study group leader. This was several months ago, because you introduced me to Brother Lawrence, and he says, yeah, even if I'm in hell, God is with me. So I found that also, I think it's Psalm 139. Even I make my bed in the depths of hell, you are with me. So I find that comforting, because I felt I was in hell in the past several years. And I said, it gave me comfort to know he's here. Sometimes I don't feel it, but he's here. So I told that to the leader of our Bible study, who I find her as the authority, because she grew in a missionary family, and I said, yeah, even in hell, I know God will be with me. And so then she made the statement that says, oh, no, if you're in hell, God is not there. It says so in the Bible. And so, yeah, of course, I don't say anything, but I want to believe God will be with me, even if I'm in hell. It gives me comfort, because he's everywhere. It's, So that's where I felt she was so certain. Okay.
Well, and of course, that has to do with what your definition of hell is. If your definition of hell is a place that God sends those who are damned and forever will be outside of his presence, well, then what she says makes perfect sense. But if we start to understand hell as a personal perspective, I guess, a personal attitude, then we could be standing face to face with God and not perceive him and be in hell. And that's the way that Brother Lawrence is looking at it. And that's the way the mystics tend to look at it as well. And so even in hell, when I am not cognizant at all of God's perspective, he's still there. And all I have to do is turn and face him. And as Brother Lawrence said, my hell will be turned into a paradise. And but that's a very foreign concept to the usual concept of hell. So,
and it's also very dualistic, like God is not in a particular place. but God is everywhere.
Mm.
There is nowhere that God doesn't exist. And, you know, if we think of this place that's devoid of God, then we're back into the duality, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. All right. Hey, Lindy's there. Hello, Lindy. You turned on your camera.
I was cooking in the kitchen. I didn't think you needed to see that.
Oh, we would have loved to have watched you. It'd be like watching a
I
cooking
heard
show.
everything.
Ah. Did you come on camera to tell us something?
No, I just wanted to let you see me and know I was here. It was not just a computer.
Very good. Very good. All right.
Well, so I want to end to Lindy because she was cooking dinner. My daughter, my 16-year-old daughter, is cooking dinner. She made pork chops. It smells so good. I'm so proud of her. She makes the best pork chops. She puts cumin and salt and pepper.
My intention was to finish what I was doing in 10 minutes and it just didn't happen.
That sounds like every day of the week for me. My intention is to do X, and it just never
Yeah.
seems that the day runs out on me. What can I tell you? Okay, well, good. I think we brought this to a good closing point. And
David.
yeah,
I have a question. Something
Okay.
that's resonating with me. I before, and I've heard this be said before. I even heard you say it a couple of times. I had this belief just growing up that every person is born holy. Every person is born almost with a halo on their head. And it is through their experiences that they begin to separate from God, essentially. And I heard you say something, and I've heard it said many times before, just that a contrary statement that we're born godless. I just wanted you to elaborate on that a little bit.
okay, well, what I was saying, that is basically the doctrine of original sin, that we're born totally depraved. You know, it's the foundation of Calvinism and you know, other Christian denominations, that we're born completely depraved, completely outside of connection with God because of original sin that's imprinted on us from Adam. And so that would be the idea there of this. But that's not the Jewish idea. To the Jew, and it's codified there in Genesis, that everything that God created, he looked at and saw that it was good, you know, including us, you know. So I would say it's what you just said, you know.
That clears it up. That
Yeah.
makes.
There's a great line from one of William Wordsworth's poems where he is talking about a baby being born, and the line is, "Trailing clouds of glory, this baby comes into the world." And I love that image, and it just is stuck with me for decades. Trailing clouds of glory. I have to get the whole rest of the line so you can have it in context, but that one image is what stuck with me. Trailing clouds of glory, we come in. And then, yes, slowly we become more and more separated from that. Beth, what were you gonna say?
Nothing.
Oh,
Thank
okay,
you.
okay. All right, I think we're done here for tonight. So Scott, are you still there? Oh, there he is. Hey, Scotty, can you close us in prayer?
I sure can. Father God, we're so grateful you're here. We're so grateful all of us can gather up this way and use the technology and the knowledge that you've given us to communicate and share and learn about you. We ask, Father, that you continue to bless us with knowledge of wisdom and discernment to really understand these things we're studying, not just do them as exercises or social engagement, but to really understand and get the value out of them. So, Father, we just petition you in prayer and ask you to increase us in wisdom and knowledge. Thank you for your love. Thank you for your constancy. Thank you for being you and your attitude towards us. Jesus, it's in your mighty name that we pray these things. We give our thanks and say our amens. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, everybody. Another great
Thank
conversation.
you, everyone.
All right.
See you later.
Bye.
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 Good night, everybody.
See you soon.
Okay.
Good night. Good night. Adieu, adieu, adieu.
Good night, guys.
Bye, Scott.
Good night, Scotty. Good night, Judy.
Good night.
Good night, Sherry.
Good night, Sherry.
Night.
And John and Jordana and Linda. Okay, you guys.
Bye, Linda. Bye, Dave. See you guys on Sunday.
You got it.